scouting, you're managing other cultures, other customs, other languages, other, permissions and sensitivities and borders that you don't even know are there, and you're trespassing on places you didn't know you were trespassing, and danger. And, there's so much that goes into working internationally that isn't just about taking pretty pictures, obviously.
Right.
And especially on the scale of the films that I fell into, the bringing a film production company the size of the Mission Impossible franchise is like, a small city. I mean, it's not a small city, but I feel like it's very much and I'm sure other people have used this before, but I feel like we're run very much like the military. I feel like we can drop into almost any country and be self-sufficient. And like create the bubble and get our work done and then move out. And sometimes people don't even know we're there.
Locations, go to 2.
Becky on 2.
Hi, I'm Becky Brake, supervising location manager, transitioning into consulting and producing. And this is Locations on 2.
And this is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2, the podcast that takes you around the world and behind the scenes with location managers working in all branches of the entertainment industry. You can find me online at doddvickers.com. Locations on 2 has episodes available anywhere you get your favorite podcasts, or you can visit us online at locationson2.com. Locations on 2 is brought to you by the Location Managers Guild International. The LMGI is a global organization of location professionals working in the film, television, and commercial industries. Visit them online at locationmanagers.org. My guest on this episode of the podcast is location manager and producer Becky Brake. Becky's known for her work on Mission Impossible, Godzilla, and Star Trek Into Darkness. Now it's time to jump on over to the back channel where the real work gets done on set. Locations on 2. So growing up out west, did you always have this interest in the entertainment industry and getting into film?
Well, I grew up in Colorado, and I wasn't really that interested in film and entertainment per se, but I think I've always naturally been interested in sort of organizing things.
Oh, okay.
I think probably the first intro into entertainment was in high school drama, like doing a play or two. And I quickly found out I don't have the talent to be out front. But also I didn't have the dedication or the interest. I was always looking around for the, behind the scenes, what everybody else was doing. So I think clearly I was priming myself, or when I finally started acknowledging that, is that I'm always interested in the whole overview of projects. And although I do like the detail management that goes into location management, happy to pay attention to all the details. So, and I had the opportunity to, I moved to Vail when I was like 20 because I wanted to be a travel agent, and I wanted to get out of Colorado, out of my little hometown.
Oh.
And be around.
So you wanted to be a travel agent.
Well, I wanted travel in my life, and I thought it was through travel agency. I've always been attracted to, other cultures. Like even in high school, I tutored. I helped as an assistant tutor to our exchange students, and I've just always been attracted to opening up to other cultures that were different than my own, and so Vail was attractive because I had an opportunity with a job to go up there as a travel agent. I lasted about 6 months because I wanted to be a ski bum. I was like, wait, this is too weird. I have a 9-to-5 job and I live in Vail, Colorado. So anyway, it was good though, because it taught me quickly that that's not my cup of tea and probably never would be. And so I waited tables and did a few things. But ironically, what was funny is that I walked dogs for Ray Stark and, that cuts to later, but Ray Stark and his wife, Franny, and I used to walk their 2 dogs. And when I got ready to make my transition into film, I hit them up. No, it wasn't for film. It was for theater. So he sponsored.
And Ray, you mentioned he's a producer. Is that right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, the producer. Anyway, I wanted to get into theater. I did some little, community theater stuff, trying to produce and support and help with that in Vail. And then I had an opportunity for a sponsorship to go to the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center as an intern, and Ray and Franny sponsored me to go to that. And that is an extension of Yale. And some of you may or may not know that the Sundance Film Festival actually sort of evolved the film version of what the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center does, which is they bring in playwrights and they bring a play up to its feet. So it's similar to what happens at Sundance. But so I got to go to Sundance Film Festival, same thing. Sundance Eugene O'Neill Theater Center as an intern, and I was exposed to all sorts of parts of the, theater. So, you had to dance, you had to write a play, you had to sing, even if you weren't talented in all those things. And when I came out thinking that I wanted to start a theater company, so I went back to Vail, had a great experience there. I went back to Vail, tried to start a theater company. Didn't do so great at that, but an opportunity for concert production came into town. And I was the first and only employee at a film festival that we were starting, that John Giovando and Ida Kavafian. It was a classical jazz blues film festival that was happening up in Vail. So I got into concert production, and it grew rapidly, the film festival. So I learned, just from the grounds up, not having any exposure to music, just like with film, and had a really great time with that for about 6 years. And we did everything from, quartets to Guns N' Roses. It got really big. So it was all over the place. They had the New York Philharmonic. So we were used to, it was a really great program. It still exists. It's called Bravo. And then I started, tiring of concert production and looking for something else. And I remember I was asking myself when I knew I was going to do this interview, what my inspiration was. And I think when I saw Dances with Wolves, and I don't remember what year that was, but I remember thinking, wow, I want to tell stories like this, or I want to be part of this. And I found a way to weasel my way into the Sundance Film Festival as a volunteer, similar to the experience I had at the O'Neill, where I just made all kinds of connections and experience, and went to the Sundance Film Festival as a volunteer and collected business cards and, networked, and then came back to Vail and gave about 6 months notice, because I was pretty integral to the concert world at the time, because it was small staff, and then moved to LA. And then I called all of those. I had 200 business cards of people that I had networked. I sold popcorn and tour tickets, and then I called everybody, and also
so this
one
is
of the
somewhere around the early '90s, I'm guessing, just based on
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, well, I was actually 1992 when I went to the Sundance Film Festival.
Okay, all right.
So, and then I moved to LA in '93, and so I. So Beth Melnick, actually, her mother was on the board of the Vail Valley or Bravo, Colorado. And so I met Beth through her mother. And then when I moved out here, Beth was one of the people that I called. And she was able to get me on a non-union feature film that she did. And that was my first experience, really, as a assistant, and it was up in Mendocino, which was amazing. And I was like, I'm in heaven. I've landed. It was, but I really had no idea what I was doing, and I remember being confused when the construction coordinator asked me about dumpsters. I was like, why are we providing dumpsters for you? Don't you get that? You're a construction guy. And then when I got back to LA after that film, that was really fun for about a month. I was up there on location. Then it was a matter of, just trying to get work through any source. And I had a lot of physical production skill sets, and understanding of organization and trucks and permits and toilets and tents and all the things that go with concert production are very similar to filmmaking, location management. So, but one of the biggest thing that I am aware of and that I remind people of when they're making that any kind of transition like that is that I didn't know the language. I didn't know what a DP and AD. I didn't know what anybody stood for, a grip.
Right.
Like there's this whole other language to any industry that you get into that's important to learn before you, and especially if you don't come from an academic background of learning from school. So, and then, work begat work. I just kept networking and did the old, worked as a PA. And I remember, it was a really low budget little film. And the guy said, well, we need a second AD. You want to do that? And I was like, well, okay. But I didn't know how to do a call sheet or.
I was going to say, that's a lot to inherit if you don't know what you're doing.
I know. But it was like, we were all getting paid like $25 a day, which was basically gas money to get to the locations. Right. It was some little low budget $250,000 movie. But I learned what I didn't know, which was enough to say I don't want to be an AD, and also that it's not where my skill set is. So my big break came, I think Laura Sodi Madison actually introduced me to Robbie Goldstein, and I was brought on to Strange Days. Yeah. The movie Strange Days. And, that film had about...
Catherine Bigelow film.
Exactly. And that film, we had... it was all nights, and I was the set sitter. And once again, I was still learning, don't touch other people's equipment. And there was just a lot. And at the time, our union wasn't as strong as it is. But he did get me into the union on that film. So, but it really launched me in the fact that I was very comfortable with 10,000 people because of my concert production background. It was not as big of a deal to me. And I met the fire department, and I started to get relationships with all the right people, the permit office, because of the exposure on that one film. Working with the military. I mean, it just had so many stunts and pyrotechnics and helicopters and landing zones and, visual effects and everything. I think we had, and it was all night. So I was doing a lot of
And that's grueling.
It was grueling. Robbie actually taught me how to scout as well. I didn't really know how to, I took photography in high school. And I was quite good at it actually. But I didn't know how to do a pan, or I didn't think to do a pan. And so he took me downtown on, I think it was one of the next films. And then it turned out that I had a pretty good eye, that I could actually, the director responded. We did the next film, I think was Men in Black, and Barry Sonnenfeld kept choosing my locations over some of the other scouts, and he was very funny about it, because
it does come down to the photographs sometimes.
And he would say to the the other scout, he'd go, "I'm sorry, but you won again," it just turned out that I had a instinct, a good eye for the feel and the vibe and the character of what we were looking for on that film. No, it was Get Shorty. That's what it was. It was Get Shorty. Yeah. And
what kind of gear were you using? I'm just curious because things have changed so much. We talk about
I don't even
the
remember.
craft projects back in the day, printing out the pictures and pasting them in folders and all that.
Yeah, I loved the printing out the pictures and the placing the folders. Like one of your interviews said, the thing you learned in grade school was who knew that it was going to be such a great asset to have. But
it's funny because I shoot Fuji, and I have shot everything. I have a Canon, I've got a Fuji, I've got other things, but most of the time I shoot Fuji, and it's funny how many times they come back to a picture. They don't even know who took the picture, but they point at that picture, and sometimes it's the color saturation or something really subtle.
Yeah.
And you realize, oh, okay, they're falling in love with this not only because of the composition, because there's other things there. And that's funny how those things can be interpreted by a director, cinematographer, production designer in looking for a location and assuming, well, we can do better than even the scout can do. Look how beautiful this is already.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's funny because production designers and directors don't want to see you do have to take the informational images of like, oh yeah, there's a building in the background that's ugly and whatever. But
what's the reverse?
You know,
that kind
you
of
also
thing.
have to show them, you know, what you're seeing or what the potential is. And I was pretty good about like going early in the morning or if I needed to, or at the magic hour. And I used, but to answer your question, I don't even remember. I think I've always had Canon, but I think I was all about the 400 gold, you know.
Oh yeah, the film. Yeah,
it was all about the film, and I shot way too many pictures. I mean, I went through a ton of pictures, but I loved having the options of, and I always shot a beauty shot, you know, to put on the cover, like a sales shot, and then my pans on occasion would be way too long, and you know, I had to learn all about it, but it seemed the presentation, because I enjoyed the presentation so much, I think my photos got chosen a lot, you know. And in fact, I remember I was called in for, as well as a bunch of other people to scout on, is when I first bumped up to manager, and it was, what was the Die Hard? No, was it Die Hard? I can't remember the film actually now, but, and all the older managers that were like old school and they'd been around a million years, like, well, first time I saw a production designer flip through my folders and toss them aside, I stopped putting that much effort in. And I was there like an hour and a half after they left. They were like, we're going to go. We got our folders together. And then I was the only one that they kept on, you know, because my pictures were the ones that, but it was because I took all the time to make sure I trimmed them properly and blah, 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 you know, so.
Right. And that is important. And I think that is ignored. And, you know, I don't want to get too bogged down in the technical things that scouts should learn. But I've had so many scouts that don't bother to crop the image or even just take the time to straighten it. They just, you know, we have it's so easy by comparison to what you were doing. And digitally, it takes 2 seconds just to process it, straighten your image if it's crooked, and then post it. And they don't even do that. And and I have to go do it before I show it to somebody. Yeah. And I'm like, straighten your image. Come on.
It's funny, though, how the industry has changed, though, because when you think about some of the producers and some of this, especially in television, and I don't do television, so I can't really speak to it. I did Alias, and then that was like the end of my television career. I loved it, but it almost killed me. I don't know how people do television. I was I loved that show and I loved all the people I was working with, but I was like, oh my God, like if you guys ever do features, call me, you know?
Yeah.
And, but anyway, I know scouts now that, you know, I mean, of course the iPhones are great, but even before that, the producers have gotten so used to the digital thing that they want the information instantly. And there's less requirement to do presentation as much. Other than on features, I've always felt like we had to do presentation.
Yeah, no, I you know, my experience is still that if you're showing 10 locations, you better show me the first 3 pictures better be the ones that sell that location.
Yeah.
So, and even if you're doing it from the field, because we're under the timelines, for those people that don't know, working in television versus features, you might get a script 2 weeks before you have to shoot it.
Yeah.
So I've got people out in the field and I need them to shoot those locations, upload them so we can be looking at them continuously.
Yeah.
And fortunately, a lot of people have the ability, to use their phone, not to take the picture, but even to get the pictures off their camera and upload them to SmugMug or whatever we're using for that show, Dropbox.
Right.
But then I do need them to edit slightly and make sure that the 3 best shots of that location are featured before I even get there.
Exactly.
And I don't have time to go through them all beforehand.
Exactly.
So we've got to do some minimal presentation at the very least.
Yeah, I agree. It's, it was never, the minute we stopped doing film, I sort of fell out of love with scouting, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know why that is, but I think, I know Lori Bolton resisted the longest time, but I resisted even longer than she did. I'm just not a technical, I don't enjoy the computer. I'm much more of a person that enjoys humanity. And And I've always, and since I've bumped up to managing, I've always really loved and appreciated the folks on my team that are really solid with that. And I highly rely on them to, present diagrams and do photo editing, even if I do take my own photos. I mean, I like taking photos, but I love handing over my photos and having somebody else
having them get turned out. Yeah.
I mean, it's just, I like that part, but most of my scouting has been like, since I became a supervising location manager, most of my scouting is really about the research, and then just helping the studio make decisions about which countries we're going to based on the script or the locations or the safety and blah blah blah. So it's it does involve taking some photos, but it's not what sells. I don't think. I think more the research recently has been what sells the studio, and they're not always my photos. So, but anyway, I fell out of love with scouting when we switched over to digital. It was just too irritating to me to be on the computer that long.
Well, it's funny because that wouldn't necessarily you would think that film would be harder, but I get what you're saying about the personal touch. I mean, I still have a film camera that I carry, and I'll shoot stuff, but I never shoot stuff to show anybody. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm not saying that I want to go back to film. I love the efficiency, and I like how things look on the screen now, on a website and stuff. So I just mean that I don't know what happened. I just moved into being much more interested in the management and the ambassadorship and the international relationships from that. So, after that happened, it was like, okay, what next, So
what was it that, I was just going to say, what was it that, at what point did you realize, I've worked with people from the stage, and you talk about your interest in theater. I just did a show with somebody very well known on Broadway, but also directs occasionally. And Julie Taymor, and such a different approach to film. And you come from a interest in theater, even though you weren't doing Broadway, into the film industry. Did you ever think of moving into theater, or was it all, did you, when you found film
what I realized about the theater that I loved was the family feeling of, all the collective, collaboration of what happens in theater, and that sadness when it ends, like the fact that it's a project and that you start it and you develop it and then you produce it and then you wrap it and then you all go away and it's like being in a war together. It's like you're very close to the people, and it's a lifetime, it can be a lifetime connection, good or bad, but film is very much like that for me as well. And it's, I don't know why. I think it's because I ended up in concert production. I mean, I had a really great time doing theater in Vail, but it was very community level. It was nothing, professional. And it was just, became fun. And I think the film attraction was that I wanted to make money. I thought, if I'm going to work this hard, I want to make money.
And have fun.
Yeah, and have fun. But I felt like the whole volunteering all the time and the whole trying to make a buck and survive. And I'm not saying that every theater is like that, but I didn't see it as a professional. It didn't fulfill me professionally like film has, as far as the learning the industry as much. I really enjoyed it. I love live theater though. But I love watching it. The same with concert production, actually. I loved producing it, but I don't really like, it's the opposite with concert production. I don't like to go to live concerts.
Oh, really?
Which is bizarre. But
one of my mentors and good friends, Mitch Harbison, produces a really huge blues festival in Florida every year. And it's his love. I mean, I think he does film and other things in order to be able to do that.
Yeah, funny.
which is funny. And I do enjoy going to the occasional concert, but there's very few people I'll battle the crowds to go see. But something like a festival style concert is much more attractive than your traditional going to a stadium concert. So I kind of get what you're saying.
Yeah. I guess because in Vail, we had this, the Ford Amphitheater, and it was such a beautiful little venue, and, 3,000 seats and lawn seating. And it was just such a magical little place to be doing concerts. And for the larger ones, of course, we had other venues. But I don't know. I just have always enjoyed live theater, but not so much live music.
When you got into what you're doing now, at what point did you realize like locations was your niche? What was it about locations, and why did you fall in love with it?
Well, funny enough is that I didn't, when you don't know a lot about something, it's like you don't know what you don't know. I knew that I had a lot of the skill sets, like toilets and tents and trucks and permits and all that from concert production. But when I first came here and people say, well, what do you want to be or what do you want to do? And I was like, I don't know. And I kept saying coordinator. And I realized almost as soon as I got on set that I really wanted to do locations, because that was more in line with what I felt really confident about and that I thought I could grow in. And I was always attracted to locations for like a lot of people think that scouting, if you become a assistant location manager or you get in the industry as a location manager, that you're going to be traveling the world. And I had the same naive idea is that, if I was scouting, I'd be traveling the world. And, that took years. There's so much more that goes into that. And really, it's management goes into that as much as scouting. Even when you're scouting, you're managing other cultures, other customs, other languages, other, permissions and sensitivities and borders that you don't even know are there. And you're trespassing on places you didn't know you were trespassing, and danger. And, there's so much that goes into working internationally that isn't just about taking pretty pictures, obviously.
Right.
And especially on the scale of the films that I fell into, the bringing a film production company the size of the Mission Impossible franchise is like, a small city. I mean, it's not a small city, but I feel like it's very much and I'm sure other people have used this before, but I feel like we're run very much like the military. I feel like we can drop into almost any country and be self-sufficient, and like create the bubble and get our work done and then move out. And sometimes people don't even know we're there. Even on a large scale, it's because we, can build our own bridges, we can build our own roads, we function. We also have hierarchy, the efficiency protocol of who talks to who. We have codes of conduct. It's very easy to know who does what and where to go, and it makes it very efficient. So I fell in love with locations, I think. And also I didn't realize that I'm a true lover of architecture. I'm not a scholar by any stretch, but I will see a building and appreciate it as much as I would like a beautiful mountain, Right. When we were in Dubai, I literally had a crush on the Burj Khalifa because it was so stunning. It was brand new. It hadn't been occupied yet. We were there when they were still doing the landscaping. So we were watching all that work going on. And it was just a beautiful, shiny, tall. I'd drive to work every morning and look up and just go, oh, my God, that's so beautiful. So that appreciation for architecture made me fall in love as well. But I think the main thing that I fell in love with as an assistant was the exposure to and the experiences of working with people in all walks of life, everything from having to ask homeless people to move their camps because we're going to sterilize the next day, up to, the ruler of Dubai, So, but as an assistant, I really did, we went in LA. It's such a diverse bunch of different cultures in LA. It's such a great experience to, in the same day, you could be in the desert and then be throwing a jacket on and walking into talk to the owner of the, some private club where, or a building that's, everybody's dressed to the T. So I liked that range of negotiating, and I'd never, so that's what I fell in love with. It was really the negotiating and the trying to solve the problems, like shutting down an oil tanker, so that you could get your movie shot. Yeah. All those things, you're like, wow, I'm exposed to shipyards and, all sorts of locations that other people don't ever get to see. So, and all sorts of people that most people don't ever have access to, negotiating with everything from gangs to, executives and owners of countries. And,
What was your hardest negotiation you had to do so far?
Well, I would say hardest, not the gangs for sure, but the most the most time-consuming negotiation I've ever done was the Lawrence Livermore Labs for obvious reasons, for Star Trek.
Yeah.
I think it was Star Trek Into Darkness. Yeah. Brilliant Scott Trimble found that location. Yeah. It was amazing as our engine room. And it's the Department of Energy. There's like multiple background checks. And, also the way the government works is that they have to get bids, and, it is very difficult to budget that location. Just making sure that we could actually coexist with them was a really challenging negotiation. Usually on some of the international locations, we have assistance from above, meaning that they have a firm. The studios will sometimes bring in a consulting firm that will make the introductions. And then, so it's less about difficulty and more about just trying to communicate the scale of what you're asking to make sure that the yes is really a yes. And,
right.
And similar to, I think I have talked about it before, like in other cultures where it's really difficult to get a no out of people because they have very specific cultural reasons for not ever saying no. So they give you they continually give you another option, like, oh, well, did you find out if we could get into that location? And instead of saying, no, we can't go there, they'll just keep showing you other locations. And then eventually you understand, oh, this is the no. Means that we're not going there. So, but it takes a while to get that nuance and to learn that, to understand that language. I always loved the language barrier breaking down the language barrier. That's like my new thing that I love about my job.
How many languages do you speak?
One. I speak a tiny. I speak English. Sadly, I'm embarrassed about that. I understand and speak a tiny bit of Spanish, but not enough to have a conversation. And the same with Korean. I can understand and speak a tiny bit of Korean, but not enough to really sit and have a dialogue with anybody. So, but I'm trying to learn both of those as well. I love that experience of. I use images a lot when I travel to other cultures. And I love speaking in images with images. It's just, and also Google Translate. But it's not always,
no,
accurate.
not at all.
So it can sometimes be offensive. I mean, some of my favorite thing is trying to accommodate when I go into a foreign country. I like to be aware of what some of the offenses are and do my best not to do those. And then I always try to learn just the thank yous and the greetings, like right. I can say thank you in a million languages. I mean, in a lot of languages. So, my current love is having had the opportunity to work on the Mission Impossible franchise and the Star Trek. Even in Star Trek, we work internationally a little bit, but my latest thing is just the merging of cultures. I loved our experience in Dubai and in Russia and in India and putting our cultures in the film industry, I mean, our crew, and merging it with a culture and the way they do things and the way we do things, and, maintaining our own safety standards and our own, we have all of our U.S. regulations that we have to abide by regardless of where we are. But it's always a fascinating, that's my newest love, is the ambassadorship that happens as a supervising location manager when you are scouting for a studio to go to all these cultures and countries, and the relationships that you build with all those people, and finding the ways to.
You were talking a little bit when I was talking to you before about the transition from traditional location management into consulting and supervising location management. And now you're moving into the world of producing. Talk a little bit about the organizational skills, the creative vision that takes, because that is a different role.
Yeah, well, especially on the Mission Impossible franchise, because it's we try to go on that franchise. We would go to countries. We often would go to countries that didn't have an infrastructure, as much infrastructure as film-based infrastructure as other countries, and so. It is about managing it's the funnel of information, but, like Ghost Protocol is probably the best example I can use. Talking to the folks in India, they were like, please just don't do another Slumdog Millionaire, because every movie that comes here, that's all they show. And and they were like, can we just please have, fortunately, everybody responded to that. And our big black tie party was in India. So we had our big, beautiful saris and Indian dancers. And, we were able to show the other side of India that nobody ever sees, like the wealth and the nice cars and all that stuff. So I loved that. I loved being an influence in that. And, the Russians were like, just don't make us a bad guy. We're always the bad guy. And of course, our main guy was the bad guy, was Russian, but fortunately we had I don't know if this was in the script before, because when I was initially scouting, one of the things that happens sometimes on a lot of projects, not just Mission Impossible, but initially is you would scout based on a beat sheet, or, you didn't really have a script per se, and it was evolving as you go. And so fortunately we had a police officer character that was able to follow Ethan Hunt all the way to the end. And, and so it wasn't like all Russians are bad guys. It was like this one guy was, but he stayed a Russian and he stayed a bad guy. But, so I love that kind of, fluidity. And I think that's an important role of the supervising location managers, to bring the information back so that the studios can make decisions. I mean, a lot of stories are really story driven. Action films are very action and location driven, like what can we do that's amazing? And you can do that in a lot of different places, and it's always fun to find something fresh and new to show, which is what made going to Dubai so fun, because they had never had, a lot of people hadn't seen it. And we really did have to accommodate a lot of nuances to the culture that we wouldn't have had to do in another country. But other countries, we have different nuances that we have to adhere to. So I think the supervising location management is when I really started to enjoy location management, because I was able to hire people that were much better at what they do than I am, including scouts and some managers, even just that standing out in the middle of the desert and wetting down the helicopter pad, that's just not what I want to be doing. So, but there are people that they have that sense, or also even in Dubai, when we had small issues with the getting the brackets onto the helicopter that we wanted to use, getting permission. Lyle Gardner, my location manager there, mean, he wrote a book in order to get it through the government. To get it, I mean, the time and the effort and knowing what was required was just I was so grateful, because it's not something that I would have done well, So I like that I can delegate to people who can actually use their talents, which are, as a collaborative team, comes out much more of a contribution than if I were trying to, do all that stuff myself. So
we've had a couple of people talk about working in remote locations and having to, you mentioned infrastructure, and that's what made this come to mind. As somebody in your position now as a supervising location manager and producer, when somebody brings you a location that is remote and you're going to have to look at, okay, do we build a road, and then do we build a dock where the boats can dock, and what does it take to justify something like that creatively, budgetarily? What's the conversation that you think would be something we haven't talked about before?
Well, I think it's one of the things that I mentioned to film commissions when I talk to them is that for a country, or for us to go to a place, there has to be an anchor location, like something that we can't find anywhere else, or something that brings to the story, or to the, like in Vietnam, we were going to go to Vietnam on one of the missions, I think it was 5, and Halong Bay, is like, you don't find that in a lot of other places.
Right.
There are other places to shoot that, but so even if that's the anchor, and it's complicated. It's not like it wouldn't have been an easy shoot. We didn't end up going there. So, Il could talk more about that. Well, he did, I think, talk more about that on his film. But so I think that and also sometimes you can get so much mileage out of like a LiDAR scan or a plate unit, going somewhere. And it's worth going, because you get something that you can't get anywhere else, or a smaller team, or, but I think, I think the remote location thing, you really just have to think of, how can we do this? I mean, at one point we were going to go to this place, Whitsunday in Australia, and it was this beautiful island. It's this beautiful outlet of white sand and water, and really stunning. And it was for another planet. And the only way that we could foresee how we could actually do it was to get a cruise ship and put the crew on the cruise ship, and then boat, with small boats, transport people back and forth, because we didn't want to destroy the island, or, destroy the environment. And we also, it was, too far remote. It was 2 hours or something, to get on a bumpy road that would have destroyed the environment, as well as our equipment and our people. And, so it's just always thinking of solutions that you can make this happen. I remember we wanted to go on one of the Star Treks, one of the early Star Treks, I think. We wanted to go to this place in Brazil, and I'm going to forget the name of that park, but it's so far that even having a helicopter land, and it was really more about the logistics of refueling a helicopter to even get there. We were like, oh yeah, it's not going to work. We have to go, we can't even get a helicopter there for as long as we need, because there's no place for a fuel truck, close enough to make it make sense. But you have to kind of go down that road until you discover that that's not going to work. But, yeah, so, I think it's, to answer your question, I think it really is, it's budget as well, but it's really about, is it the production value? Is it going to move? Look, going to the Lawrence Livermore Labs was not inexpensive. We had to hire, in order to put people up into that equipment, we had to hire like quantum physicists to stand there as extras, and they're not cheap.
Really?
So, well, yeah, because we couldn't put one of our people. It's a $5 billion asset. We can't have somebody go, oh, what's this wire? Boom. So, there's a way to prioritize, like, okay, well, do we really need somebody standing up there? Yes, we do. Okay, who would that be, and how much are they? And, can we get them to, because legally the government can't, pay them less or whatever. They're, you're dealing with both entities, our studio, union deals and theirs. So,
you mean you can't hire a physicist at union scale?
I know. So, so there's all kinds of different things that go into deciding whether it's worth to go somewhere. But the first thing is to see if we have the permission to go there, if we can get in, and then. And I notice a lot of people always say, I know that it's part of our job to not ever show images of a location we can't get to or we can't go to.
Right.
You're supposed to have it cleared before you show the locations. And I always say, are you kidding me? I can't tell you how many locations I've shown that I don't have cleared. But of course, I make everybody well aware, look, we don't have permission. Do you want to show the director? But even the Chesapeake Bay Bridge in Mission 3, we showed JJ and he fell in love with it. And I was like, I don't even have it cleared yet. So, but a good example of that is NASA on Tomorrowland. The last shuttle had already gone, and that 39A, we got to film on 39A before it was dismantled for Elon Musk. And part of that, and so NASA was like, I don't know, because we're in negotiation to lease it or sell it or whatever they do. He said, but we're not even allowed to talk about that because it would jeopardize our negotiations. And so we found out so I think that, because JJ and Brian are buddies with SpaceX,
right?
They called. They're like,
hello,
hey, are you buying the launch pad? Because we want to film there. And when are you going to start construction? And so we were able to get permission without, NASA getting into trouble and without, any kind of jeopardizing to go there because they didn't want it to jeopardize the negotiation. And we're like, well, if you're not going to start dismantling for another year, then we have time to get in and get out, And so we were able to gain permission that way. The same with, even in Dubai, we didn't really have permission to film at the Burj Khalifa, and we scouted it a couple different times. We had permission to be in the country and scout about, but we didn't really we hadn't reached out to anybody until they got, the required letter from above that it was good. It was good to go.
It's interesting. You talk about, I think a lot of people assume somebody like J.J. Abrams says, I want that location, let's go get it. And that is probably true to a point, but there has to be the production value to justify the investment because everybody has somebody else to answer to. Is there a specific instance where there's some location that somebody really wanted, but you just didn't know if you could make it happen, and especially at the cost value, when you analyze what you're getting out of it, but then it ultimately fell into place for whatever reason?
The only time I remember, I think script approval sometimes can be a challenge, if you're on a Marvel or a Bad Robot film, because, or Chris Nolan, or, because sometimes as directors, there's no way they're going to give you the script for Star Trek or Star Wars.
Right.
And so if you go to a foreign country and their government is like, I've heard stories from other people, but I personally have not had, and also I've been doing this before. It seems like a lot of countries are coming on board now, to get film commissions and, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, the Republic of Georgia. I was like one of the first people to assist them in getting I was the person that assisted them in getting a FAM tour together for location managers, scouts to come so that, they had to grow into their film commission that way. But so, I don't know. I haven't had any experiences where where I've seen something and I thought, oh yeah, it's not worth, I don't think we're going to get it. And then we get it anyway. None that come to mind.
What's a conversation like when you're talking about going to somebody remote? I just think that'd be interesting from a cost benefit analysis basis, because we have to deal with the practical as well as the creative. Like, when is it justified? What is that from that perspective as a supervising location manager / producer? How does it get justified internally to say, that's going to cost, but we're going to get X, Y, and Z out of it. It's worth it.
Actually, here's a good example I just thought of. On Tomorrowland, I showed images to. Sometimes I'll show the producer before I show the production designer or the director, just to make sure they're on board or they understand what I'm going for. And I showed pictures to the producer, the executive producer, to the City of Arts and Sciences. And, and he was like, there's no way we're going to Spain. Like, you're crazy. We're not going. So stop it. So then we went to the production designer and then there was a place because we were looking for Calatrava. We went to Wisconsin and Ilt had already shot there before, but the museum there, I can't remember what it's called, but they, so we were scouting small, because here was this beautiful Calatrava City of Arts and Sciences in Valencia, Spain, that covered everything, but we were piecemealing it because the producer was like, "Oh, we're not going there." So then, cut to like a couple of weeks later, I'm sitting in there. Fortunately, I was in the room, but I was sitting there with the executive producer and the visual effects producer comes in and he's like, "Becky, have you seen the City of Arts and Sciences?" And I said, as a matter of fact, I have. And Jeffrey said, I shouldn't drop names, but anyway, he goes, "Well, I think it's going to be too expensive for us to go there." And he goes, "Well, if you see my visual effects budget, you might want to reconsider." Because filming it practically was so much less expensive than the visual effects department building that entire city. So, so that came through. We ended up going to Valencia, Spain, and shooting Tomorrowland there. So that might be the best example where I think, oh, it's not going to happen. And then it does anyway, because somebody with some bigger bucks comes in and says, it's really the production value. And sometimes, or budgetarily, like, if there's another way to do it in piecemeal, like first unit doesn't ever go, second unit goes, or it's only plates, or it's so many different ways to cut it. But the big deal is whether the location has the weight to tell the story. If it's worthy, right? And also if it's kind of a bit of a wow. A lot of the blockbusters that you see on the screens, they want to show you something new, because we're all seeing, a lot of the same places. And it's like in LA where everybody knows oh yeah, that's that restaurant down at, so because we've all seen it in television and stuff so much. So the world is becoming smaller, and films have gone all over the world. So people are looking for fresh and exciting, but it's got to be worthy of carrying the story further, or wowing, or doing something, bringing something to the table for the studio to go, yeah, we got to go there.
Yeah, I'm always telling scouts when I'm working on something that I give them a breakdown, and they go, "Oh, well, this is there," and I'm like, "No, it's somewhere else." And they, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I know that place. We all know that place. There's somewhere else that we haven't looked. What else is there? That's what you're being paid for. It's not just going to the same old places every time. What else is there that can accomplish the same thing? Let's find something new." And that's the fun part of scouting for me.
It is. It's true. And also, like, for me, the making the logistics work, like we were talking about the Lawrence Livermore Labs earlier. And I'll just tell this little story about language, back to language, was one of the things that I love about language is that when we were at Lawrence Livermore, the head scientist, I was standing there with them, and we were all talking about, like, obviously their idea of a clean room is very different than our idea of a clean room,
Right.
And we were literally going to be filming in what one would call a clean room. So they were trying to express their protocols, and we were trying to express our needs, and, that kind of thing. So, but this one moment happened, and I tell people this all the time when they ask me how many languages do I speak, but where another scientist came up to speak to him, and and he's standing right next to me, and the other scientists asked him a question about something. I guess they were having trouble with a piece of equipment, and they said, what do you think? And blah, blah, blah. And then he pondered for a second, and then he answered. And that entire conversation, I have no idea what they said. They could have been speaking Russian, because they were talking like quantum physicists and astronauts, and like all those people up there, like in a whole other dialogue. And so I always encourage people not to use acronyms and to clarify what they mean by that, So, but that's my fun thing, is that once we do get the locations chosen, is to really finding the nuances that that are troubleshooting, that are going to protect the studio from, liability and or, us being able to get the work done that we want to get done.
Yeah, so. Absolutely. And you've talked a little bit about being called in by production designers to consult on sets and locations. Talk a little bit about that relationship, because I think, that is the creative relationship that's outside the world that most people think location managers inhabit, with logistics and how we get there and all that. Talk a little bit about the relationship with locations and the production designer who's trying to find the perfect location to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I'm transitioning into producing. And so I've been trying to not take any big jobs for the last few years, and 2 or 3 years. But so I've found this little niche of consulting, which is visual. It's like a visual consultant, but it's really it's location management consulting along with the visuals. But it starts with the visual, and the job is really researching and finding images that inspire or evoke, or that are emotional. You get the emotional response, like, oh my God, that's it. That's what you're going for. And recently, and sometimes the studios have done it as well. I know they'll sometimes call people for a file pull, but I've actually been paid for 3 months to do it, to really dive into all over the world, where would you go? And then also from a safety standpoint, or from a, incentive standpoint, and a little bit more of that, but it starts with the production designer. And my favorite production designer, obviously, is Scott Chambliss, and he and I have done so many films together. And so I recently came in on a project that he's working on that was really fun, and it's and it may not be the location that I also did it for Godzilla. So I helped him find Godzilla's lair, and then also Mothra's lair. And then even if we don't end up going there, what happens is that the production designer or the creatives, the director and the production designer, wrap their brain around that location, and then they can either build it, or they design it, or they go there. One or the other. But it helps them develop the look of the film by having somebody from a location standpoint, with a location manager brain, giving all those options. And so that's another favorite part right now, because I am the physicality of some of the scouting that I've done on some of the other films is so killing me that I'm ready to sit at a desk for a while, So I've really enjoyed that search, of, and it's stuff like you can just say, I've had people say, especially on the Mission Impossible franchise, find locations that invite action. So it's okay, I can do that. So, it's all over. It's whatever you want to bring, and then they respond, and sometimes they bring stuff, and sometimes, so, it's my favorite new thing is consulting. I recently did it, on a couple different films, but I did it for Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and I did it for, there was a skin planet. And I found these images, close-ups of Mars that were just incredible. And the producer was like, "Oh my God, we'll just give this to visual effects. We're done." So So, it can be, it's a huge contribution. Location managers make a huge contribution to the visual and supervising, and, sometimes just the scouts. Like, I can't take credit for all the brilliant sci-fi looking, locations in Star Trek because I didn't find them. But but because I'm the funnel of information, I'm the one that decides what to present to the production designer and the director out of what my scouts bring. But I just surround myself with like brilliant scouts, and they bring and they understand that stuff. But I also enjoy the search myself now that it's more online versus me out running around the world doing that. So, I think, and then transitioning into producing, I think it's funny because it's a similar thing from going from concert production to going to film production. I mean, to location management. It's a whole nother language that I'm learning. I'm definitely outside of my comfort zone again. Mm-hmm. And I'm learning the business of film, which is once again another language. And, but what I bring, having been a supervising location manager or just even a location manager, is so much because we interact with every department and understand the needs and the breakdowns. So even though it really isn't where the focus is when you're talking about film funds and, negotiating contracts with actors and directors and stuff, but it still brings so much more to the table with all that practical on the ground experience, as well as the production value, the visuals, the creative contribution that we make.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's not recognized as often, as much as and as important as the logistical and practical parts of it are, is that creative relationship that we have with the design of the show and the look of the show. And, what is Batman without the Batcave? That's the old joke. And you've got to have a place to put the Batcave. If you're not building it on stage, whatever it is, you've got to have a place for that character to exist. And that's where it comes down to the locations department. Yeah.
I mean, I don't take away from the production designer or the director and their visions, but at all, because they're the ones that are editing what you're bringing. Right. But the fact that we're bringing, like when on which one was it? On the first Star Trek, I think, that I did with JJ Tremble brought us the Budweiser plant. And once again, we didn't have it cleared. And I was like, I showed it to Scott and he's like, oh my God, we got to show this. And I said, it's not cleared. And whatever. So, but, the Budweiser plant was like the big thing, because, and then when he brought us the Lawrence Livermore Labs, then it was like even bigger. I was like, oh my God, it looks amazing on film. And, so that was, so our way of doing that was a little different, but that looks incredible on film, that Lawrence Livermore Lab. I mean, I'm still proud of it to this day. And I love Godzilla's lair. I mean, I loved the visuals in Godzilla. I didn't do the film. I just did the development of it, of the locations. And I don't even know where they shot, where they ultimately shot, because I wasn't on the film by the time they started, really finalizing it. But the contribution as a consultant and as a location manager, working directly with the production designer and the director on that is the idea of like, what about this? Right. What about that? And, the caves in Thailand were, there's so many beautiful locations that were melded into one.
Right. I was going to say, a lot of times it's the idea on the script, then you bring them 20 different looks. And goodness knows if they build it, they probably take those looks and incorporate the idea they've put together from what you've brought them, or find a location based on those, even if it's not the location you brought to the table.
Exactly. And sometimes they don't know what they're looking for until they see it. And sometimes they're very clear about what they're looking for and they want you to find it. So it's really is a collaborative, contribution on everybody's part. Yeah, so I love that. I love that part.
This is Dodd Vickers, your host for Locations on 2. To find out more about me, just visit doddvickers.com. For more episodes of Locations on 2, look anywhere you get your other favorite podcasts or visit locationson2.com. Thanks again to the Location Managers Guild International for making this podcast possible. You can find out more about them by visiting locationmanagers.org. Until next time, I'll see you online.